Is this working, Eric?
Choice of words.
Oh, yeah. That's okay.
I knew what you meant.
You guys ready?
Oh, I forgot to do me. There's 5.
All right, I'm going to talk about ocean sustainability today. I want to first talk about coal plants. A lot of people think that coal plants are a source of clean energy, but that's not necessarily true because they release mercury into the environment, and this mercury eventually falls into the ocean and collects into the ocean and collects into marine life. And this affects us in a personal way because we eat marine life. So you may be wondering, how much mercury is, actually getting into people's bodies. Well, the EPA suggests about 7 micrograms per day is a safe limit, and in 1 6-ounce can of tuna, there's about 60 micrograms of mercury. So, yeah, it's kind of a lot. And it builds up in the body, and it's kind of hard for it to expel. It takes about 6 months to a year. And the sustainability of the oceans is a dynamic issue that involves, more than one problem. And this other problem is plastic. It's accumulating in our oceans, and it follows the currents and collects in these areas called gyres. And it's like a big whirlpool in the middle of an ocean. And the biggest of these is the North Pacific Gyre, and they call it the Great Pacific Garbage Patch now. And it's a bit larger than Texas, and it's not really like one specific spot with a bunch of garbage. It's all spread out, and sometimes it's underneath the water, sometimes it's on top, on the surface, so it's hard to tell exactly how much is there. An area that's affected by this a lot is the island of Midway, and some people might know that place because it's famous for the World War II battle where we defeated Japan, but now it's a symbol of plastic. It's just covered in plastic. Just from birds alone, bringing it in from their stomachs, and they die on the beach, there's about 10,000 pounds a year brought there. Fishing nets and large pieces of plastic are also a big issue because they drag along the shoreline and they rip coral reef apart, and they wrap around animals, and they cause strangulation and starvation because they can't get out of it, so they get stuck. And there's about 640,000 tons of this in the Pacific Ocean alone. The smaller pieces are even more concerning because they photodegrade and they get into very small pieces which are almost impossible to clean up. They're ingested by birds and fish and cause intestinal rupture. Plankton is a main source of food for marine life, and in a lot of areas of the North Pacific Gyre, there's 40-to-1 ratio of plastic to plankton. So, say a fish tried to bite for food 40 times, 39 times it would eat plastic, and only 1 time it would actually get food. Also, there's chemicals that get soaked into the plastic. They get attracted to it. They're called persistent organic pollutants, and these compounds don't ever really break down. And so the plastic kind of soaks them up like a sponge. And some examples of these chemicals is PCB, which is like coolant and insulators, DDT, which is pesticides, PAH, which is oil and coal byproducts, and the most important is BPA. This is interesting because it hardens plastic. It's what hardens plastic, and it also is found in all of the world's oceans now. And it's also found in about 93% of Americans' bodies. It was originally designed to be birth control, and it emulates estrogen, and it can interfere with an organism's endocrine system if enough is in the body. So some simple ways to reduce the impact of this problem is maybe limit your use of single-use plastics, maybe not buy so much bottled water, buy like 1 canister and just fill up water instead of buying a bunch of bottles, because those bottles never go away. They go somewhere. And maybe if you see something that you want but you don't necessarily need it and it has a lot of excessive packaging on it, try not to buy it if you don't need it, because you're contributing to helping this problem. Maybe bring your own bags to the grocery store. This is something that doesn't really limit your life in any certain way. It just, helps a lot. Recycling too, but remember that when people recycle, more than half of what goes in the recycling bin isn't actually allowed to be recycled. So in conclusion, learning about coal plants, plastic to chemicals, I hope all of you become a little more knowledgeable in this situation and found it somewhat informative. So thanks.
Very
That
good.
was very good.
Very good. He was much more comfortable this time.
Yeah, that was excellent.
Practice a little bit.
And you know what?
Very
I have
good.
lots of questions.
Sure.
Are we talking about just like the random water bottle that gets washed into the ocean, or are we talking about people dump in the ocean?
It gets dumped in the ocean because there's a lot of, they call them small plastic pellets, and that's what creates plastic. They start out as little pellets, and these factories a lot of times are on the side of oceans, or they go into big, containers that go on ships, and sometimes they fall out and they land in the ocean. And also just dumps, people dump them out, or they fly away, like plastic bags a lot of times will fly away because they're so easily hit the wind and whatnot, so.
Wow.
You can tell that this is something you feel
You're
passionate
interested.
about.
I think
You
it's,
really
a big deal,
really
so,
good.
Yeah.
thank you.
And I did not know that about fish, every time they bite, like out of 40 times,
Yeah.
Yeah, and
That's
it's,
terrible.
yeah, and that gyre, that's how it is.
Wow.
And this plastic is so small, it's like, you can't clean it up anymore. So the more we do that, the more it's just becoming like a problem that we can't even solve, so.
What are there, like plastic particles that are floating
Yeah.
through the ocean that you may not even be able to see, but they're
Mhm.
there?
They're almost microscopic now, they're so
Wow.
small.
Yeah. I'm glad I don't like fish.
Much, much improved from the first one.
Yes, very good.
Good job.
Very nice.
Yeah, interesting.
Thanks,
Yeah.
guys.
Yes.
It's easy to talk when it's a subject you enjoy talking about.
Yes.
Yes.